Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Jackie Glenn, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. The title of my talk today is How to Eliminate Gender Bias and Decrease its Impact on Your Career. It's a long title, but basically, how do you eliminate all bias? But since we're all women, how do we eliminate gender bias against us, and decrease the impact that it will have or that it's having on our career? So let's dive right in. And Chris, I'll tell you a little bit about on the next slide who I am. I am, again, Jackie Glenn. I am the founder and CEO of a consulting practice, Glenn Diversity. I am an immigrant. I came to America at the age of 19, and I've been here for a long time, too long. I've got 3 adult children and 5 grandchildren. And so that's a little bit about me. I'm a former chief diversity officer at EMC, now Dell EMC Technology. And I left the corporate industry in 2018 and wrote a book, the one I'm holding in front of you, Lift as I Climb, An Immigrant Girl's Journey Through Corporate America. And it really is some of the basis of what I'm going to speak with you today about, showing up boldly and avoiding bias. And how do you not avoid it, but how do you address it and fix it? So that's a little bit about me. And as I go along, I will add a few more tidbits and bits about me. And if you have questions, I don't know, Olana, how we will do it, but maybe you can take the questions. And if there's a question, you can just interrupt me, or we can save about 5 minutes if we have time at the end for Q&A. I want to invite all of you up front, just in case we run out of time, that if you do have a question that I didn't answer, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And so here's a few, we call it housekeeping items, rules, guidelines for today. I always, when I do a presentation, put this note on here. I know that we have some language differences, but I always like to say this is a dialogue, not a debate. So although you might be, for those of you who speak and understand English, please feel free to unmute yourself and speak to me if you have any questions, or put it in the chat, or give it to Olana for those of you who English is your second language. I want you to keep an open mind. An hour is not enough time for us to tackle this subject. And so I'm hoping that I am just opening up a way for us to start this dialogue. And even when I'm not with you, you will continue this dialogue. I also want to make sure that you ask questions. You're in a brave space. No questions is off the table. So those are my housekeeping items for today. But I want you to perk up a little bit. And for any of you, I want you to ask yourself a few questions on the next slide. And, you can answer them to me, or you can just write it down while you're there. But do you find yourself unsure of what to do next in your career? I am going to step out on a limb a bit and think that there's a few of you that might have relocated to different countries, and you're trying to figure out how do you take your skills and move them, make them relevant to where you are now. So do you find yourself trying to figure out what do I do now with what I have? I could answer that for you. The second question, do you have a personal board of director to consult and talk things through? Do you have a personal board of director? I'm going to talk about what that looks like. Do you have a trusted advisor? I know I came to you, and I'm drawing a blank right now, but I'll come up with your name as I go along and warm up. But someone introduced me to Irina, I might be butchering your name. And that's how she reached out to me. And I feel like Irina and I have become a bit of a trusted advisor. So do you have someone that you trust that you can talk to and share some of your thoughts your deepest thoughts and concern as it pertains to your career? Do you feel that you are overlooked for jobs because you're a woman? For those of you who are on this call that are working, you've been in the working world, but you feel like you're stuck, you're stagnant, and you are not going anywhere. You feel like, oh, and you feel alone as a woman in the workplace. I worked for a company where 70% of the workforce was male. So there were days when I felt very alone, and as a woman, but also as a woman of color. So if your answer is yes to any one of these questions, doesn't have to be yes to all of them, then you are not alone. Many women feel like, either they're stuck, they feel discriminated against, they feel like they have not really had that trusted advisor or that board of directors that they can rely on. And so let me go on to the next slide, and I want you to, and let me check the chat because I want to make sure. I see some yes in the chat every year. Diva 9. Someone said that's like the basic question now. Yes, my parents. Yeah. And I would love to hear more from the interpreters. Someone said that's the basic questions now. And is it the basic question because most of you that are on this call are Ukrainian and you're displaced somewhere else and you're just relocated to another country, another city, another region, and you are trying to figure out what to do with your career. So I'd love to find out the person who write that that's like the basic question now, to write me in the chat thoughts around that, a little bit more on that. So look at this slide, and I want you to just take a look at it. And this is for you to do. Our career journeys takes us through many paths and at many destinations. Sometimes we go all the way up and then we, have things that change in our life, like we get married or we have children, we moved, we jump out of the workplace to take care of our loved one, or maybe our parents, and your career shift. Our journeys are all unique to each of us, and it tells a story. And so take a look at this slide and look to see, where is your journey now? Are you somewhere feeling like you're at the bottom of this mountain? Are you in the middle, or are you at the top? And I feel like for me personally, when I look at this chart, I would say I'm one of those flag going up towards the top, because I retired from corporate America and started my own consultant practice and really have been doing well ever since. And so I feel like I am at the top of my career, because the next move for me would probably be retirement. So let me take a look, and I want each of you to take a look at the next slide really keen, because this is my career journey, my personal career journey. And I really like to use myself, because I don't want to ask myself permission to use my name. It's mine and a stage, and I can use it. And so I want you to, I hope you can see it, but I heard this years ago that when you look at your career, you should look at your career in quadrants. And the Q is for quadrant, not quarter. And a quadrant can be anywhere from 10 to 20 years or more. And so if you look at the first quadrant in my career, quadrant 1, Q1, that was the big move. And I, like you, no, I didn't leave Jamaica because there was a war, but I moved to the United States from Jamaica for a better life. So somewhat similar, for a better life. So if you look in Q1, that was the big move. I worked as a nanny. And for those of you who love to read, my book is out on Amazon, but I talk about the fact that I came to this country and took a job. Even though I graduated college in Jamaica, I took a job as a nanny to get to the United States. So I worked as a nanny in the Midwest. Then I did that for about 2 years. I moved to Boston, where I live now, with my husband of 39 years. I forgot to say that. Then I got my first job in in a hospital where I worked as a unit clerk at 2 hospitals. I worked 5 days a week at one and on the weekend at another, while I went back to school and was trying to get an American degree, or pursuing an American degree. So I show you this only to say I wanted you to see how the quadrant works, and your chart might be a little different where you might have more here, because there was a lot of things that went on in Q1 of the first quadrant of my life that I don't have on here, because like meeting my husband, like a lot of other things, and like losing my brother. One of my brother was killed in Boston in the first quadrant of my career. But let's go on to quadrant 2, and that's where my professional journey began. And I show you this because for those of you who have relocated to another country or another province or another region, you might have to rejigger what you used to do just to get your foot in the door in an organization, or just to get your career restarted. And we can talk a little bit more about that. Q2 is where I was still at the hospital, and I got promoted to a medical transcriptionist, because while I was at the hospital, I was doing some free courses that they offer for self-development. I enrolled in another college, in a 4-year college. I completed my undergraduate degree. I obtained my first job in HR, and I became a full-time wife. I don't know why I always put full-time wife, a student while I was going to school, and then a mom. I had my first child, and I serve as both a mentor and a mentee. So I found a mentor, and I mentee some of the younger people that was coming up through the hospital. And then, as you look on my journey, you can see where I added things to it, some things stay, but I got promoted again in quadrant 3, joined a professional board as a board member. And then the last quadrant, which was in corporate, which was Q4, I became the chief diversity officer at a technology company. I wrote and published my first book. I launched, and remember I said within a 10 to 15 year span, launched my own business, speaker, coach, advocate, author, CEO, board member, and now. And so this is what a career journey looks like. My career journey looked like. Everyone is different, but I always like to show it, especially to people that are immigrants like myself, who have relocated to and really are trying to figure out, how do I go from here to there? So, Chris, if we go to the next slide, I want to make sure you know you can ask me questions. Now we need to adapt them to the new reality. Yeah, but the war changed goals, and goals became irrelevant. Yeah, but you can have new goals. Now I'm still in Ukraine now. Okay. The goals are goals. And I always tell people that goals, no one said your goal is not going to change and you don't have to step back from your goal and rejigger it, or sometimes throw that goal out and come up with a new goals. That's the reality of most of your life, that some of the goals that you had in place have changed. It doesn't mean that even if you're there in Ukraine, you cannot still decide. Just coming in this session and joining us today is a goal to continue to build your education, to continue to build your awareness, to continue to put more things in your toolbox and learn more. We all are not what people just see with the eyes. I can look at any one of you on the screen and I can see certain characteristic about you. You might have blonde hair, you might have black hair like me, or brown hair, but that's not all there is about you, Anastasia. You might, okay, I like green sweater, and I'm looking, am I saying your name right? Is it Anastasia? All of us have different intersectionality that makes us unique. There's so much more to us than beneath the eye, as they say. There is more to you than we are seeing today. And I want you to look at this chart and just think about you being on this chart. And this is how you are going to reinvent yourself, structure your goals, and move, try to move forward. And so I did this chart years ago for a group of people that were displaced, they were laid off, and I asked them to build one for themselves. I am so much more than what you see. I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert. I am an immigrant, a proud immigrant. I'm an author, a Black woman in tech, an HR practitioner, a mother, a thought leader, a wife, a caregiver, a partner, a sister, a collaborator, an advocate, a grandmother, a gram, as I like to call, a student, and an executive coach. And so all of that in my interest makes me who I am, Jackie Glad. My intersectionality makes me unique. If we had more time, I would go around the Zoom and ask you to put what makes you more unique. Because if I interviewed you for a job, Vita, I would basically ask you, what are some of the skills or what are some of the things about you that I can't tell from looking at you? Because I'm trying to figure out, is there something there that we can use to build your goals and to really move you from one point to another? I love quotes, and there's no secret that on the next slide, Chris, that women are often overlooked in society when it comes to jobs, promotion, leadership position, and more. You never know if the next woman that is sitting on the Zoom to you is going to be the next president, the next Nobel Prize winner. We are women, we are untapped resources that extend beyond who we are. And so I found this quote and I love it. One of our greatest natural resources is going underused. And she may be, notice I love it, she may be the woman standing or sitting next to you. And it was inspired by Anna Quinlan, Newsweek columnist. I love this. You should keep this as you go out and try to, figure out what you want to do and where you want to go. I always love this, that greatest natural resources that's going unused. I want you to take a look at some stats, and I never do a presentation or a workshop without statistic on women. This one was a 2020, so it's not that old, 2020 analysis by Mercer of 1,100 organizations across the world. So it's not just America, it's across the world, found a leaky pipeline for women in leadership, with the representation of women decreasing, this is deep, as the level progressed. Take a look at the chart because it's very telling. Women are lost from the pipeline. You lose them from the pipeline. That leads to more senior and executive management positions. So the higher up you go, and you can look at this chart and tell, when you look at support role, that's the longest bar on the bottom. The next one is professional. The next one is manager. The next one is senior manager. And the next one is executive. And as you go up the ladder, as you go up this column, you can see where women have fall off. And so it's really, really important that we take a look at where we're going, what we want to do. And for any of you that are on this in the session today, that are in a position and you feel like you've been there for a long time and nothing is happening, then this might be a good point for you to just stop and restock and say, you know, where am I going? Maybe I need a coach. Maybe I need a trusted advisor. I thought this research was really, really important because Catalyst, Women in the Workforce, Global Quick Take brought out the same study, and then Women in Management from Catalyst. And so it's important that we understand that, you know, it's great to transition to a role, but that you want to make sure that you are moving ahead. And the way that you get to move ahead is, you know, continue to ask and be relentless. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. What's the future holds for women? I love this slide. Women already have the job skills to position them for roles in high growth field of the future, but are overrepresented in industry most likely to be affected by automation. And we will put this on. This is a catalyst. By the year it's estimated that by the year 2030, an estimated 40 to 160 million women may need to transition to higher skills role, necessitated higher education and upskilling. And so just being in this session today is such a good thing that you're doing, because upskillings might be needed. And if you're at a point where you're trying to figure out what to do, joining a session like this is a good start. Women are currently underrepresented in high skill subjects like STEM. Globally, women make up 35% of STEM students, but only 29.3% of those working in the scientific research and development, R&D. And so there is definitely an argument to be made about, you know, job transition and upskilling, making sure you add more. I just this past weekend got a doctorate degree, an honorary doctorate, and someone asked me why I wanted it. And it's just a matter of upskilling yourself and making sure that you have the tools. So when the things change, you can go along with it and be skilled to transition. Knowing that the future said that women should think outside the box. So, and you know, I'm going to ask all of you on here, all 28 of you, 27, maybe 26, not counting Chris and I, the woman should think outside the box. What's holding you back from what's getting in your way? And, you know, I really would love for you to put in the chat, you know, how are you feeling individually? Everyone, what's holding you back? You know what, answer this question to me. Why did you join today? What's holding you back? What's getting in your way? Do you feel stuck? Answer some of those questions for me, because I know that the organizer, Arena, is one of those people that want to know what's getting in your way so that we can know how we help you. You know, what's holding your back, what's getting in the way of your career growth. I think I personally think as an immigrant woman, there are two things. There probably more, but there are two things that I truly believe hold us as women back. Number one is imposter syndrome, and number two is bias. So let's dive in and take a look at what is imposter syndrome, and is it really holding us back? I know it held me back for a while. And where it shows up. So imposter syndrome, where it shows up and how do we combat it? And we said we were going to combat. Imposter syndrome is the belief that you are inadequate and incompetent failure, despite evidence that indicate you are skilled and quite successful. There's a study that shows that imposter syndrome affects more than 70% of men and women, especially high achiever. So let me just say, imposter syndrome is the false belief system that leads some people to self-sabotage. So you move to another region, there's a job in that region or country that you did when you were back in Ukraine, or if you're still there, and you're telling yourself, that, you're not qualified enough. So it leads some people to self-sabotage, turn down career and growth opportunity, and limit their own career trajectory. None of us is immune from it, including myself. And so imposter syndrome show up. I'm not good enough. I don't think I am qualified enough. And there is a joke that I hear a lot when I go to women's conferences, and it says that, if there's a job description out there and a man look at it, and some of you might have heard this before, and there's 5 things listed, and he has 1, he will say he's qualified. A woman will look at it, she's got 4 out of the 5, and she'll say she's not qualified. That is imposter syndrome. So I want you to keep that in mind. Let me show you how imposter syndrome show up. Now, this is your assumption. The first one, the assumption that what you know, look how small you think you know, and what I think people know. That's how it's going on in our head, where we think we know a little bit and that people know a lot. When in reality, when in truth, you know just as much what you know, what you already know, and what people think is at the same. And so it really shows up, and you have to really try to stifle that assumption and not let it overtake you. You want to go with the reality. And I always say when I go into sessions, I know the reality is I know just as much as the people that are there, sometimes even more. So the assumption is almost always wrong. So don't assume that everybody knows more than you. So let's take a look at bias, because we're talking about how do we combat bias in the workplace, against us as women, as against us as immigrant, and against us as just as individual, as human. And when you define bias, bias is the human tendency to make preconceived opinions, thoughts, or decision about someone, something, or a situation based on influences from society, observation, or experience. We all of us have biases. And I want to stop here for a minute, because this is how you get discriminated against, where people have biases, and biases become discriminatory because some of them have preconceived opinion, thoughts, and decision about someone, like they might have preconceived thoughts and opinion about immigrants, about women, about, things that they have observed or experienced, and that can turn into bias. So as I like to say, when I talk about bias, bias is like the air we breathe, and all of us have biases. All of us, every single one of us here today. So just take a look at that for a little bit. I'm going to let it out, and I want to show you the biases, how it shows up, and how we can mitigate it, and how you can call it out. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I'll give you a quick exercise on how do you call bias out when you see it. So there are 2 types, conscious and unconscious, and unconscious biases. Conscious bias is what we know. We know we are prejudiced, we know we have preference, and other observers in us. And this is not necessarily, oh my gosh, I'm so bad because I'm biased. This is what I know about myself. And I always use myself as an example. I can be very biased when it comes to my grandchildren and my children. And I have to make myself, I also am biased because I'm in HR, and I have to make sure that when I'm looking at resume, I'm also not just looking at, do you have skills for skills, but what are some of your skills that you can bring to the table that doesn't necessarily match the job description, but I know you could do it. So conscious bias is the one that is explicit, you know it, people see it in your behavior and observe it. The unconscious one is the one that you will address when you go to get a promotion, to get a job, when you feel like you're in a situation and you're being discriminated against. And it's the bias, we are unaware. So the first one is like, you already know, you know it. The second one is you're unaware of your prejudice and your preference. And we believe we're acting objectively and fair. And that's the one that's dangerous because people think they're doing so wonderful. Oh, I'm just trying to help you out, Irina, or I'm just trying to be your friend, Vida, and you're stifling me, or you're not giving me the opportunity that I need, or you chose someone else to do the job that was your buddy. So look at some example of conscious bias, referring to a bias attitude that you're unaware of. We know we're being biased and it's intention. There is malicious intent when you know it and you do it, and it can be easily observed. Now, conscious bias is so opposite. You can't easily observe it. There is no malintent most of the time. We may not be aware that we have them towards certain people or things, and refer to bias attitude and operate outside your awareness and control. And so I talk a lot on unconscious bias because I think all of us have learned over the years how to manage our conscious biases. So one good way, and I think, Irene, you had asked me to explain this. So one way, if you feel like you're experiencing bias, or it's rearing its head, or you're like, what is going on here? I know I could do this job. I always like the next slide is how do you mitigate? How do you, I don't think you can ever abolish or get rid of bias, but you can definitely mitigate it and lessen it or call it out. The way you do it is to practice constructive uncertainty. That's going to be your saying the rest of the week. You're practicing constructive uncertainty. So what is constructive uncertainty, Jackie? It's the number one simplest concept for mitigating bias is constructive uncertainty. It means to be comfortable, and sometimes we're not. But as women, we have to be comfortable with questioning our perceptions and assumptions. So Irina, I noticed you chose Vida over me for the position. Or John, I noticed that you chose Billy for the role versus me. And I've been doing this role in Ukraine for 15 years. Can you explain? Can you explain to me? Don't just go away if you didn't get the job and don't ask why you didn't get it. So it means to be comfortable. And I know it's not in questioning our perception and assumption, learning to slow down, ask questions from a place of wanting to learn and not from judgment. You want to know, and shift from always being certain of your assumption. So constructive uncertainty, in this case, what we're talking about, showing up and avoiding biases, is to really be comfortable with questioning the status quo, asking questions without the judgment. I always ask questions and I always get these answers. Oh, you know what, Jackie, I never thought about it that way. And, I always say things like, well, say more about it, Natalie, or say, Natalia, say a little bit more about it. And so practicing constructive uncertainty is the number one simplest way to mitigate bias. Ask questions. Don't be afraid. Don't assume. I also want to give you another way to combat bias and to mitigate it. And it's called the pause model. So now that we have this, differentiate bias, the two different types, conscious, unconscious, and you know how to mitigate it. we want to make sure you know also how to pause. How do you pause and really take note, especially as you continue to figure out how you want to, not change your career, but some of you might want to do that. Carve out a new career, set new goals, figure something different out than what you're doing. You need to pause, so the first P in the pause, the P in the pause, pay attention, take notice of if whether or not there's bias, if the bias is conscious or unconscious, is influencing your decision or your perception. Should I ask? Do I even want to work at this job? Do I even want to go to this function? And then acknowledge that bias is occurring. You might not know Jackie, but this is how I'm feeling, and I think bias is occurring. Understand it's the perspective of reason for the bias. Why is it that there's 90% of male working there and it's just only a few women, and it's not a great, someone had always told me it's not a great environment for women. Says who? Let me be the judge of that. And then, seek alternative or shift, change your messaging and your approach. And so sometimes as you go in to look for a different career path, you might have to say, you know what, I don't know. I've never done that work before, but you know what I know about myself? I am a quick study. I'm a quick learner. I am a smart person. I know how to get along with people, and I'm a self-starter. And so change your messaging. Don't try to make it look like, oh, I don't have any skills. So change your messaging and then examine it and reframe. So you're going to pause and pay attention, acknowledge where you are, understand the reason for the bias, seek and change your messaging, and then execute or examine, where do I go from here? This era that started for me in 2020, I have coined the era of the 5 Ps. And, in 2020, the US, for those of you who are here, was plunged into so much things all at once. And I coined that era right up until now, the era of the 5 Ps, because we all were locked in with the pandemic. In the US, we saw politics, and I'm sure you saw it other places too, but it was an election year in 2020. We saw a lot of protests. You might have seen it where you are, lots of protests. We saw prejudice, whether it's against gender prejudice. We saw racial prejudice here in the US. We saw prejudice against our Asian colleague. We saw prejudice against our disabled colleagues, our LGBTQA+ colleagues, and we saw people polarized. No one wanted to talk to each other because so many people were so afraid that they would say the wrong thing. So this era that we're in, starting in 2020 and to now, and it will probably continue, I have coined it the era of the 5 Ps. And it brought to the forefront many biases and other negative attitudes that, one thing for sure that we learned since 2020, that we have to invest in our career. And one way to do that is to have sponsorship or to have a mentor. And I think I heard from Irina that most of you were seasoned, as I like call it, professionals, and you've been in your career for a while. And this is where sponsorship come in, and not necessarily mentoring. You need a sponsor. The person that introduced me to Irina was someone that I worked with, a woman by the name of Bed Sion, who asked me if I could speak to Irina, and that's how we meet. And, sponsorship is important because if you have a sponsor, they introduce you to people. I want you to take a look at this video that I'm about to show, and it's about sponsorship. It explains it a lot more.
I sort of think about it in three dimensions. There's coaching, there's mentoring, and there's sponsorship or sponsoring. A sponsor is someone who talks about you in rooms where you are not present, in decision-making places where you are not present. They are advocating for you. They are actually using their own professional capital to help propel your career forward.
More recently, people have pushed away from talking about mentorship and moved more towards talking about sponsorship, because that's not about what can the individual person do, how can we coach them to fix themselves or dress differently or all those kinds of things, but how can we as an organization, as individuals in the organization, actually promote, sponsor, and enable the career success.
It's this concept of having a champion, somebody who leans in and advocates for you and creates opportunities, someone senior to you, and basically allows you to demonstrate your ambition, your drive, your intellect, your capabilities, so that you are ready for the next role.
Sponsorship is really about promoting someone's skills, talents, and ability. Providing cover if they mess up, because junior people are going to mess up, but you have to go through those growing pains, and it's really helpful to have someone who is there for you, because you're going to do great things and you're also going to have slips, and sponsorship can provide backup when those things do happen.
To me, it's action, not just listening and talking and advice. It's personally reaching in and intervening at key moments. Perhaps even unnaturally pushing them into a next role when maybe they didn't even feel ready. I absolutely do that and look for those opportunities.
That it's what people say about you, behind closed doors. They advocate for you. They are speaking for your behalf and about you when you're not there. I think often it happens and you're not even aware of it.
When I first came to Canada in 2005, I was like a fish out of water. Sponsorship has transformed my life 360 degrees. The one thing I would say, Tanya, thank you for holding my hands and showing me the way, and really taking me to the next step. I feel exactly
the same way, so
I'm really tearing up.
So I think everyone that on this in this session today, if you don't have a sponsor, you should get one. And it's easier said than done. But maybe another topic that we should talk about at some point, Irina, is how do we get a sponsor and a mentor? Because if you look at mentor versus sponsor, what's the difference? A coach talks to you, a mentor talks with you, and a sponsor talk about you. And I know Beth talked about Irina when she met me and said, would you be willing to talk to her? So keep that in mind. Let's move to the next slide. I know I'm running out of time, so I want to make sure I use the time wisely, Chris. A little bit more stat data in action. Chris is going to put this in the chat so you can read it at your leisure. But it basically said women leader experience more burnout and stress. And if you look at those little buttons, the bright blue is burnout, the lighter blue is chronic stress, and the black is exhausted. And if you look at the women versus men, look at where our numbers are. Overall, we are way above the men. Senior leadership way above in terms of burnout, stress, and exhausted. And then with even as a managers, we're burnout, stress, and exhausted. So, it's really important that you recognize the sign. You help your mentor, or if your sponsor said you look like you're burned out and stressed, you can see it and you can recognize it and you have a remedy for it. Let's go to the next slide. I know there's some questions. Another data slide is the women manager tend to be more supportive, which we know. Some of us have been manager. I know I have. And I think a lot of times you're more supportive because you're a natural nurturer and you can show up with empathy. And so employees with women manager are more likely to say their manager have supported and helped them over the past year. Excuse me. We're going to cut this and put it into the link also in the chat so you can use it. but I wanted to bring this to bear. If you look, the blue box is the woman manager, provide emotional support 12 plus percentage point more than the men. And it's not that we're natural nurturers, but it's not that we're saying all men bosses are horrible. No, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying with a woman managers and leader, you get a lot more caring and feeding and support. Not all the time. Look at check-in on overall well-being, 7+, help make sure workload are manageable, 6+ more than the male, help navigate work-life challenges, 5+, and then help take action and prevent or manage burnout. So I love this slide. It's a good one to show. Let's go to the next slide, Chris, because I want to just a little bit more data for you, because data is irrefutable. You can't lie about the data. The data is the data. Women are almost 4 times more likely than men to think they have fewer opportunity to advance because of their gender. 4 times. And then 2 times, women are 2 times more likely to think their gender will make it harder for them to advance in the future. And this is a study that was done by McKinsey. Let's move to the next slide, Chris. I love the next slide because I know that a lot of you on the session have gone through a lot of adversity over the last year and probably still going through some. And, I always like to put the slide up, because you find yourself in a situation and you keep asking yourself, this is not what I had planned for my life. And you want to also make sure you show up advanced despite all that you're going in, that you don't get stagnant. And so when you advance despite adversity, you still have some goal. There might be small goals. There might be goals that are long, viewpoint, but still goal-orientated, working towards your goal. Despite whatever is going on, be proactive. Don't wait for something to happen or for someone to come to you. And both, you're going to encounter adversity, both large and small, every day. So how do you navigate them and not let it keep you down? So I love this. How do you advance despite adversity? So earlier on, I talked about the book that I wrote after I left corporate America in 2018. And I put a couple of the clips here, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But the book is a quick read. It's really about the gems that I've used as an immigrant woman coming to this country to navigate my way to the highest level of corporate America. And these were the gems that I used. So when you think about how do you stay resilient? How do you show up? You want to always show up authentically. I still have an accent. I've been in this country forever. And I talk about being an immigrant all the time. I try to slow down and pronounce my words, but I have an accent. So I show up very authentically. Sometimes I don't necessarily pronounce the words in the King's English, but they get it. Responsibility, taking responsibility for your growth, for your education, for your career. I know that a lot have gone on in Ukraine over the last year or so, but you still have to step back and say, okay, what do I do with what I've been dealt with? Being flexible, being able to say, okay, I was X, Y, and Z, or I had a job before the war doing this. So I'm not going to take a job doing anything but that. That's not flexible. You have to be flexible. So being self-aware, knowing what you can and cannot do, what you can and cannot tolerate, having faith. And faith doesn't have to be having faith that this too shall pass. Integrity, operating to integrity. I'm actually at a friend's house because I had given Irina my word that I would do this workshop. and I have no power at my home in Boston. I'm in Boston. I don't know if I said that. And my integrity is so strong in terms of when I give my word is my bond. So I found a friend home and I am at her house doing this session. So integrity, boldness, own who you are, be proud of it. We're all here trying to make a living and build our career. So show up boldly, but not rude. Empathy. I saw a sign the other day and I loved it. It was a while ago, but it stuck with me and it said, and you can quote me, empathy. All is required is for you to step outside of your own emotion to view things entirely from the other person's standpoint. So that's the definition of empathy. You don't even have to agree with me, but to be empathetic in your situation, what is going on, and it might not be your situation, is to step outside of your own emotion and to view things entirely from the other person's standpoint. I did touch on integrity. Resilience is another one. Pick yourself up, brush yourself off, and you will succeed. You will. It might not be in the time frame that you had in your head that you wanted to get it done, and then build in trust. So those are the chapters of my book, and I wanted to share them with you. And the next slide is really around the two gems that I would like to give to you today as a gift. I'd like you to leave this session thinking about how do you continue to stay resilient and show up boldly with boldness. Here are some tidbits, getting comfortable with growing and stretching and demonstrating resilience through your ideas. You might have an off-the-cuff idea, share it. Someone might just think it's wonderful and it might turn out just great. Being resilient requires that you know your facts. If you want to get a job in a different industry, do some facts. You might even have to go there and do some volunteer work or some shadowing, but require that you know the facts and you do your research. And then resilience is the ability to stay put when it doesn't feel good. For those of you who are in Ukraine still, I'm sure it's not feeling good, on any given day. But sometimes you just have to sit in that discomfort until it becomes comfortable. And, I'm not there, so I don't want to be disrespectful, but sometimes I find that, if you cannot leave, how do you make the situation hang in there and be resilient? And then the boldness gem is just to make sure you suspend all judgment and assume positive intent when you're showing up boldly. To practice, make perfect. So for those of you who are practicing and continue to practice as you speak your language, English, more practice, make perfect. I know it's probably really hard to listen to me and an interpreter, but I hope you're picking up a few tidbits. And then remember, exhibiting boldness and confidence require bravery, but you can do it. The next one is, this is the last one. This slide is really about, gems of authenticity and self-awareness. How do you show up authentically? Understanding who you are, being comfortable with yourself, embracing your so-called, and I put so-called in parentheses because you're calling them flaw. They might not look like a flaw to anyone else. My so-called flaw was my accent. I didn't like it when I was younger. I was silly, but I love my accent now. You will find people who will identify with you. So show up authentically, and that always pays off.
Що оце яке? Розділить. 3 умножить на 5 мінус 5. Ні, це 3х мінус 5 і розділити на 2. Це не розділити. Розділити на 2.
Дівчата, виключите відео, Одіва. Не відео, а звук, будь ласка.
Я перепрошую, вибачте.
Okay. Your uniqueness would be your brand differentiator. So whatever about you that you think might be unique, it would be a brand differentiator. And then the last gem I have for you today is self-awareness, being open to feedback. And although it's not easy, it's easier said than done. Stay open. If you go get a mentor or a coach or a sponsor, and they're giving you some feedback, take it in the spirit that is meant. Feedback is a gift. Be a lifelong learner. You're here today. So I take it everyone in this session is a lifelong learner. Apologizing or saying, please forgive me, doesn't make you weak. In fact, it makes you strong. And develop a personal board of director. And I'm going to talk about that even a little bit more. Now, I want to give you some key takeaway because we're right over the hour. Irene, I know I'm running behind, but this is the last slide. Key takeaway, a personal board of director can be anyone. I tend to, when I was younger in my career, not use friends and family. Now that I'm older, I use friends and I use family member, including my husband. But I also use my children because they're millennials and they sit on my board of director. On my board of director are people that are tough on me, that is not going to give me a pass, that's going to tell me the truth. But you want a mixing of friends, maybe a few family members that is not negative on your board of director. And if you have grown children like I do that are millennial or Gen Z, for a boomer like myself, I love them on my board of directors because they keep me in tune to what's going on and what's it. Your personal board of director, use them as a check, a gut check if you're doing something. Understand that for collaboration to be successful, you must be willing to share your perspective. So if you need someone to collaborate with you and help you, you have to share your perspective. Your audio has to match your video. Don't just talk and say, oh, I want to change career, but you haven't come to a webinar, you haven't come to a Zoom meeting, you haven't done the work, and you're not a lifelong learner. Keep your word as your bond. If you say you're going to do something, do it. Have a sponsor or a mentor, someone you can speak to, speak up and speak about you, someone that can refer you to someone in the field that you're looking to go into or to progress into. Have a clear picture of your path. And even though I think someone in the chat said it's sort of hard and everything has gone through the door since the war, still keep that picture in your path. Call in instead of call out. So this is when you see bias happening, calling out a person is to call them right in front of everyone and said, John, you just said something I didn't like. Calling in is taking John aside and speaking to him and saying, what you did was very offensive and I did not like it. So I like to call people in because I think the message that I'm trying to relate to them gets understood better when I call them in versus calling them out. And then last, this is one of my favorite, last but certainly not least, be fluid, be an agile, don't fear change, and embrace it. I'm going to say it one more time. Be fluid, be agile, don't fear change, and embrace it.